Hello. This webinar will be part 2 in a series that will take you step by step through building a project in Corridor Modeler for use with Roadway Designer for 3D modeling and existing pavement cross-sections. My name is Kathy Kassar with MDOT Engineering Support Services. As a recap, part 1 of this webinar series took a look at preparing the topo and importing the various GeoPack elements for use with Roadway Designer and the existing templates that we'll go over in this webinar. We went over the need to have a GeoPack plan file, modifying symbology, and breaking line work, which will be necessary to get quality cross-sections from Roadway Designer for your existing pavement. Once the data has been imported into Corridor Modeler, it is then possible to create the existing template needed for the project. There are a number of bundled components that are available for use in creating your existing pavement and cross-sections that can be used when doing earthwork calculations. The existing data we imported is also available down the line when modeling the proposed condition in the cases of widening, for instance. Once we have the template that represents the existing pavement condition, we will create the corridor, assign the template, and step through the project to make sure that the template is performing as expected. After that verification, we will be ready to create a surface and create some existing pavement cross-sections. What's important to note is that up to this point, you have not actually processed any sections. Roadway Designer offers the ability to step through the cross-sections and make sure that the template is working without having to process criteria first. It's quicker than criteria, where you often had to experience many iterations of failure, crashing, and hard-to-find issues before you could even see if you were getting the results you were looking for. Alright, so now we'll step out to MicroStation and we can take a look at the steps that we discussed. Alright, very briefly, this is the project that we have been working on, and this is the existing pavement. Looking at Corridor Modeler, this is the plan view graphics that were imported. Again, we'll make sure that those are in the ALG viewer, and we see that we've imported our existing aggregate shoulders, existing curb, and the existing edges of pavement. That's all that we have imported at this point into Corridor Modeler. Alright, so with Corridor Modeler, you have a couple of options. You can open the Create template from here, or if you open Roadway Designer, you can open it from there. Now, the thing to notice, if you're going to be working in Roadway Designer at some point and your cross-sections, it's better to open Roadway Designer first and then open up the Create Template library from here, from that icon. And the reason is if I make any changes to this template, if I go the other direction, okay, so if I were to open up a template library and then I come in and I make changes to this template library, if I don't hit save, okay, on that template library, and I hit Roadway Designer, it will basically revert back to the last save point of the template library, so you can potentially lose work. I've been through this before. So typically, if I know I'm going to be doing Roadway Designer work as well, I'll open up Roadway Designer from the icon and then open up the template library on top of that. And that way I make sure that I won't accidentally overwrite any work that I may have done. Alright, so once I have the template library open, the first thing I do is I'll go through and I'll do the tools and open my dynamic settings. Again, I like to keep my template dynamic settings at point 1 and point 1. This is a personal preference. I like to be able to snap or very tightly control where my components are being placed. And I also want the supply of fixes checkbox on for the most part. Not for the very first components that we place, but for the ones going down the line. What this supply of fixes does is allows it to give you specifics per side. So this is something you'll typically want to set, but not for existing pavement on the first one. So if I open up the components, and I'll take a look very quickly at the existing components that are in your template library, and I'll open up the multi-lane road. This one, existing pavement multi-lane road, is intended for roadways that have your alignment somewhere between the edges of pavement. So any roadway that has the alignment somewhere in between two edges of pavement, this is the one you'll want to use. If you're going to be doing a ramp or having the alignment along an edge of pavement, okay, so anytime that alignment sits on the edge of pavement, you're going to want to use the one-lane road, and that's the intention on that, is that it is for a ramp or any place where the alignment sits on that edge, on one edge. And this one, it's set up for the right edge, but that could easily be brought in and used on the other side. So the multi-lane road is the one that we will use for this particular project. Alright, so we'll go down to project templates. I'll go to new project and I'm going to create a new template. And I'm going to call this existing pavement. Okay? And then to bring it in, what I'll do is I'll grab this one. Again, my affixes are off for this particular setting. And I will go ahead and drop it in. And you can see here, you can watch this readout here and you can see that I hit that at 0, 0. Because my steps are of course at 0.1, you'll see that it moves in those 0.1 increments. And I'll drop it in. Another thing to notice too is that I don't add a point name or a point style. And the reason is anytime I'm going to use a component that's coming from the library, I don't need to give it a point name or a point style. It will use what's in the default component. However, if I'm going to make a component on the fly, if I right click and say new component and an unconstrained, then it would use whatever naming convention was included here in the dynamic settings dialog. I'll just escape out. Alright, so obviously the way that this component, if I go back to this one, it already has the L and the R, and those are specific already to the side. And the reason is because the way that this was set up with the style constraints already set, I wanted to make sure that those were specific per side. So in my template, I don't have the apply affixes. Alright. Now the next thing I need to do is take a look at my pavement section again. In this case, I pretty much have a curb and gutter section and an aggregate shoulder section. It's pretty much what I have. If we go back to the template, I have several options. Alright, so this is for a curb and gutter section that has a shoulder. And if we back out for a minute, this will seek an aggregate shoulder, a curb and gutter, and then of course the existing ground for topsoil stripping. Alright, this one here down below seeks of course the aggregate shoulder, again the curb and gutter. It also seeks a sidewalk. Now I don't have any sidewalk on this project, so I wouldn't need this one, and then it also does the topsoil. And then this last one will seek the aggregate shoulder, the curb and gutter, and then if there was a sidewalk that sat at the back of curb, and of course topsoil stripping. So this is not the one I need. So this is the one that I'm looking for, with just seeking my aggregate shoulder and my curb line. So this is the existing components that we'll use for this template. Alright, to bring those in, I'll go ahead and click the apply affixes box here, so that I will then select it and drag it in. And when I drag it in, I can right click and hit the mirror option. Mirror option allows me to place it on both sides. Alright, if I unclick mirror and I click reflect, what it would do is it would flip it over. Now the way this template shows up, it's really hard to notice that because it looks the same because of the way that the component is set. But in this case, I want to make sure I hit the mirror. I want to place it uniformly on both sides, and I will pick it at the edge of my pavement. Alright, so if I double click on any of these in the active template tab, I get to the edit component properties. You'll see here that the topsoil was set up for a depth of 4 inches. If I hit next, my curb and gutter section, I set that up for the full depth of the curb and gutter to be 14 inches. So that's just a generic based on the standard plan for curb. And that's all adjustable. For the aggregate shoulder, in order for the aggregate shoulder to work correctly, I had to give it a small depth, but it's very minimal and should not affect any earthwork quantities, because you don't want that. That's not a hard surface, so you don't want that to be excluded in your earthwork quantities. For the paved shoulder, it's been set up for 9 inches. Of course, these are all adjustable. All you do is change the numbers, and then the component depth of the pavement is set up at 1 foot, and that is to encompass the entire hard surface, the pavement that would be removed in your EarthX quantities. This is not set up to handle the variance between the HMA on top of concrete or anything like that. This was intended to be the entire depth of that hard surface material. There is a way to make it and make a template so you can have both a HMA and a concrete section and see them as 2 separate components. I'm not going to go through that here. It is possible with these components, but the way this was originally intended was just to help with earthwork quantities, to get the entire pavement section in there so that you could do your earthwork. Alright, so we'll go ahead and close that. Again, these are set up for the topsoil. The topsoil is set up to be 10 foot by default. So 10 foot of topsoil stripping, which matches the standard plans in the road design manual, so that we get that 10 foot of stripping. Of course, this is a value that is a parametric constraint, and that can be adjusted. So if it needs to be 0 because your topsoil you're not stripping topsoil, you're going right to a face of curb or right to a face of sidewalk or something, and you don't need anything beyond that, then you can do that and set that to 0. If you go down the line later and you add a slope stake line, this null point up in here will locate the slope stake line, and it will give you the difference of 10 foot beyond the slope stake line, so that way you get that 10 foot automatic topsoil stripping set up, and that has been pre-set up for you. So if you import those slope stake lines later, it will use them. Alright, so that is all that's necessary for this template, so I'll hit save, and I can close it, and we'll go out to Roadway Designer. In order to create this, first in order to create my Roadway Designer file, I'll have to manage a corridor, and then I will select my edge of my horizontal alignment, and it gives me my vertical alignment. I can limit the station range, and we're going to do that by hitting Control and this radio button. And I'm just going to pick a small area, and that's just for the sake of processing. It's not hit this Control radio button as well, and I'll come out here, and this is just for the sake of time. And we'll narrow this range up a little bit. Surface symbology, this is existing pavement and existing cross section, so we'll go ahead and use the DTM existing, and we'll just call this existing pavement. We'll hit add. Alright, so now I've added a corridor and close. Next thing I need to do after I've created a corridor, and you'll see now that it's using my existing surface that we've added in, and this is the limits of the corridor. Now any place that has a surface, you'll see it has that band of white around the blue line, or this tells me that there is a surface there. Of course, we're focused here, and that's why the yellow line is here. This is telling me the station, where the station is currently located. Alright, my next step would be, of course, to add a template. It's, of course, going to start at the beginning of my project, and for template drops, I typically drop these at 10 feet. And I'll come out, grab my template, and then I'll hit add. Alright, now I've now added my template, and you'll see that there's something changed in this lower right hand corner. It shows me my cross sections. I'll hit close now that I've added it, and I'll zoom up here, and you'll see that it's automatically given me, based on the line work that I've imported, the edge of pavement and my pavement depth, and you'll see that my pavement depth is showing as I bring this through. If I run into a situation where there is no shoulder material, we'll just edit this. If I hit display, so right click and display, I can control how the toggles are working. I can change my exaggeration. I can change how I want it to look. Close. If I right click and hit display properties, I can tell it I want to center my backbone. I say I want to make it, I want to make it a certain percentage of screen width, vertical exaggeration maybe of 2, and now I can see here, and as I pull along, you'll see it changes how that view operates. And of course what I'm getting is my topsoil stripping and my pavement. Alright, because I haven't run into any curb, and I haven't run into any shoulder, any paved shoulder. And here I run into some curb, and you'll see it here. It has given me the depth and showing me the curb section. And as I bring through, it will not show me. Here I have some more curb and some topsoil. If I reach an intersection, and then it does not give you topsoil stripping, it only gives you topsoil stripping if you have curb or shoulder. I'll step through it some more. You'll notice too I'm not hitting the process all button. The reason is if you do that too many times, it eats up the available RAM on your computer and it can crash. So as I step through, it shows me my solution, and I'm processing without actually making a surface. Processing all kind of makes a temporary surface in memory, and that will slow you down over time. So I'll just pull it across, check my stations, And you'll see I'm getting my curb sections and my topsoil stripping. Also too, you remember I gave those depths and various information on labels. If I go to Tools, Parametric Constraints, all of those labels are available to me, so I can alter any of the depths. So if I want to change the depth of any of the materials, I could select it and then change in the values that I want over any particular station range. So that's availability to do it that way. Or you can use, like we did here, the plan view graphics, and then the depths assigned in the template. But say the material depth changes, somewhere in the middle, you can always change and alter that depth using the tools, the parametric constraints, and using the depth of the material. And then adding your values and your station ranges, hitting add, and it will change those depths. Alright, so once we have their corridor set and we've dropped in our template, I can hit File and I'll do a save. And I'll go ahead and save over that. And so I saved my corridor. The next step, of course, would be to create the existing, or to create the surface for the pavement. So we'll go to Tools, Options. Typically I turn off these three reports because these, again, they eat up some RAM and they slow down your processing time. So I'll hit OK. And then next, to create surface. You can get to it here under Create Surface. You can also go under Corridor, Create Surface. It's your preference. I like the Tools bar there. Again, the only corridor I have is available to me shows up in my dialog box. I will give it a new surface for each corridor, so now I just get one called Existing Pavement. I always use the Remove Loops, and then of course I add my transverse. So if I go down to here, I'll go to DTM Existing Transverse Lines. What this does is this gives me a ribbing. It takes me along every 10-foot station where I've processed a cross-section, gives me the entire picture. Think of a pattern line. It kind of processes on a pattern line scenario. I'll also add a boundary, and we'll just add that as the DTM Existing for right now. I don't need to see any of the features or components, or I definitely don't need to densify. This would only be if you were processing at 50 feet and you wanted to see it really tight at curves, either horizontal curves or vertical curves. You could tighten up your processing. But since I model at 10 feet, there's really no need to go ahead and do any densifying of my surface model. And then we hit Apply, and it will go through and it will process our surface based on the template and the corridor that we've selected. Again, this is processing and creating a 3D surface model of the existing pavement that we're then going to use to cut cross sections. Again, on long projects, this can actually take a bit of time. It can take time if you have your surface, your existing profile that you're running off of, if you run off the existing ground profile. If your sampled spacing was very tight, that can slow down the processing considerably. Like I said, we're processing it every 10 feet. However, it will process tighter if there is points that are vertical inflection points that are tighter than that. It will process at every inflection point. There are several toggles that we can switch off, and I can show you those toggles when this finishes processing, that we can switch that can speed up the process. So if you're noticing that your existing ground or your existing pavement cross sections are processing very slowly and taking a long time to process through, there are a number of toggles that we can change that will speed the process up. Alright, so let me show you those toggles really quick. Let me close this, and again it's under Tools, Options, or again here under the Options checkbox. If you notice your existing pavement cross sections are taking a long time, you can safely turn off the vertical cardinal points if you're running off of the existing ground profile. Or you can also modify it and work off the proposed profile, and that way you don't have as many inflection points in the vertical. Most of the time your horizontal is nice and smooth. You don't have a bunch of broken lines, so you pretty much want to do those cardinal points, which are your PIs, your PCs, your PTs. And your vertical cardinal points, if you're running off the proposed, that's going to be your VPIs, your VPCs, and your VPTs. and any event points that you might have. Then, of course, the event points are down here if you need to make sure you model at, say, like the start of a crossover or the start of a ramp taper or something. You could set an event point, and you can model there. In the case of these cross-sections, the existing pavement cross-sections, you can safely turn off the external control points. External control points. Now, the thing with the external control points is if you've set any parametric constraints or point controls and you turn off the external control points checkbox, it will ignore those. So that's very important to note. If you've set any parametrics for your pavement depths and you then turn off external control points, it will ignore your parametric constraints. So what you'll have to do is then go into your template and actually change the label or change the depth of your pavement. So if you've got different pavement sections and you're running slowly and you want to turn off this external control point, you'll have to drop two different templates. So you'll make two templates, one for each pavement depth or thickness that you're trying to model, and then you'll have to drop in additional template drops where those pavement depths are changing if you notice that you're running very, very slowly and want to turn off this external control points toggle. Alright, so now that we've created the surface, we'll go ahead and jump out and create some existing pavement cross sections. On the Corridor Modeler tab, we can see we can draw cross sections from surfaces. We'll create that use the run existing ground, or existing. Alright, here we're going to use the chain. I'm going to do it by station range, and we did 502 plus 00 to 524 plus 00. I'll do it on even stations, and I'll do them every, we'll do it every 20 feet, say, and we'll do a left and right offset, scale of 10. Typically all of our cross sections we're cutting your scale of 10. That's the setup for there, for the horizontal and vertical column spacing. It's pretty normal. Under the surface tabs, we want to make sure that we are running, I'm going to run the existing tin. So this is the tin of that the survey provided, and I will pick my existing pavement DTM. That's what I called it, expavement.dtm. So I'll load that, and then I will modify. Again, I'm using the line string. For the existing pavement, I'm using the symbology default underbar GPK tilde. This is just one that we use for the proposed, or for any existing pavement or anything that's coming out of, that's a DTM that's coming out of Roadway Designer. I typically use this one. Under the existing tin, I'm using the symbology DTM existing for cross sections. Alright, and then I'll add a DP point origin here so that I can control where that's going to go. Alright, so one more look. Cross sections, I've set that station range. Alright, so I've got my existing pavement, my existing tin. So before I hit the draw button, what I want to make sure is I set my level symbology. And I'll set that to a no plot level. Alright, for the points. And I'll use the all existing label text for cross sections. Alright, and the next thing I want to do is make sure as well that I check my text height and size. So I'll come to text, and I want to make sure that I'm running that at a very small, I'm going to turn off annotation scale because I don't want them to get bigger or smaller. We'll set that to 0.2 and 0.2, and I'll set my active angle to 45 degrees. Alright, that's just so I have my cross section set. This text symbology has to do with the point names that will be displayed in cross section. So I'll hit draw. It will show me where those are going to be, and I'll drop them in, and it's going to process through. Okay, so once it processes through the cross sections, you can see here, if I zoom in, that it has put in that little label text, and that it does float above the cross sections. That's done on purpose. However, if you wanted to make them land on the surface, we open up the template library again really quick. And with the template library, if I wanted to make those points land on the surface, you would double click here, and if you change this from a vertical constraint of just being 0 on the thing to project to surface, it will drop those points down onto the surface, which then you can use those to do like a widening or something like that. If you drop them on the surface and they actually have a point there on the surface, you could then build your widening off of it. One more thing to note, sometimes the topsoil stripping, if there's any type of askew or the way that it draws, it doesn't always draw 100% right. It's close. However, it does give you the point of where that topsoil stripping location would be. So you could, if you really were concerned about it, could modify your cross sections so that you get a better surface. Sometimes they look okay, and sometimes they're a little bit off. But you can see here that this is where an area where an aggregate shoulder, so there was no component drawn there. And then of course I have my topsoil stripping section. It draws the pavement where I have different sections. Here's a section here that has the curb and gutter line, or that curb line in it, so you can see that it does draw the curb and the topsoil stripping after it. Those tend to draw the topsoil very well when you have that. When the aggregate shoulder is gapped in there, sometimes that's where you'll see a problem. So if you have more components or you have a paved shoulder in there, then they seem to run a little bit better. But when you just have the aggregate shoulder, then sometimes you get this case. But it's easy enough to clean that up if you need to get your topsoil stripping.
That concludes part 2 of the existing template series, Building a Project in Corridor Modeler for use with Roadway Designer for 3D modeling and existing pavement cross-sections, using the existing components that have been included in the template library. If you have any questions, again, please feel free to email the MDOT Power Geopack support at michigan.gov email address. Thank you.